Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Outside Information. My name is Avi Banerjee, and for this episode, I'll be joined by my good friend Nacho. Unlike the previous episodes we've done, where we looked at individual countries, in this session, we'll talk about a holistic view, how there is a rise in far right politicians and ideologies throughout the globe. History might not always repeat itself, but history can rhyme. And what we're seeing today, we saw in the 1920s and 30s when it comes to income inequality and increasing nationalism. Hopefully, we would have learned from our past. So join us for this session and please stick by it. It's long like usual. It's going to be an hour-long conversation. You don't need it in the main page, but don't close it. Keep it in the background and listen to our conversation. Hopefully, it's going to be interesting to you. How could it not? We're going to be talking about the fate of the world. So do join us and stick by us. Let's begin.
Hi, I'm Nacho Rubio. I'm the Felix Politics editor as well as here Avi's colleague.
Yeah, so Nacho, thanks for joining me. This is going to be our, second, third episode in my series of discussions about current affairs and international relations. The last episode we did was on the American midterms, and the one before that we looked at Vladimir Putin and his rise to power and his consolidation. So today I was thinking, in this episode, now that I have you and your vast knowledge of international politics, maybe let's have a discussion on the rise of authoritarian figures throughout the world as we're seeing in the last
Yeah,
few years.
absolutely. Where do you want to begin? In which, as in general outlook of the.
Can I ask you, before we move to any specific region, or any specific country, do you think there's a reason why we're seeing a rise in
Absolutely.
authoritarianism?
Absolutely. It's.
What do you think that is? I have a theory, but I want to hear your
I have
theory
my personal theory, which is this is basically the ending crisis of capitalism, which started in 28 and has continued ever since. And now, as we're approaching a new recession, which could probably come as soon as this year, we're gonna see like how things keep falling apart, and people go for strong men for protection as they see their economic situation.
So that's quite interesting. And you're saying we're going to have a recession soon. I think that's what most economists say. The Federal Reserve says that in America. There's a strong enough sense that it's a 10-year business cycle. I think in America, if you just look at the United States, this has been the longest period of economic growth. So it's bound to have a crash. But the question is, sorry, I just wanted to ask you this. I don't think that the numbers actually tell the truth. It shows that, let's just look at America, for example, that it's been growing. And if you look at other economies, there's figures that show, yeah, we got out of the recession in 2010. But the lives of the ordinary people has never gotten better.
That was the point I was going to make, exactly. That even though we have a mini recession, the situation of the middle and working classes in the Western world, and we define Western world as Europe and the United and North
But
America.
it's not only the Western world this time. This is a truly global trend we're seeing. Philippines, India, Turkey, even China.
That is more difficult to explain. I'd agree with that. Why is it going for that? Maybe I think there may be to how would I put it, to distinct phenomena there. The Western world is the deterioration of, again, like an increasing wealth gap between the lower and upper classes that is becoming starker and starker. And as you say, even though we supposedly had left behind the 28th recession, for ordinary people, the situation has probably continued to become worse. That in that case, it's again because lack of economic security pushes people to authoritarian figures. What happens in China?
Before we move on to China, it's interesting that you talk about the lack of economic opportunity.
Mhm.
Did you see, by the way, this the CEO, founder of Starbucks, is set to run for president?
Howard Schultz, yeah.
And did you see the heckler?
Oh yeah, I saw him, and I think yeah.
I'm just gonna play that heckler one more time. It's just a 1 minute clip. Let me get rid of this ad.
Yeah, no
Because I
worries.
think it's an interesting analysis. And then he goes on to say this interesting line on go back to Davos and this realization that I don't think was there 10 years ago. That you know what, the game is rigged.
So
The
sometimes
game is rigged
yeah.
in the sense that the powers that be all huddled together in these elite conferences in Davos and say, you know, we're going to help the people. But what's actually happening is the plutocrats are getting richer. Now, Oxfam does a study every year. I think they calculated the 26 richest people have as much wealth as the bottom half of the world's population.
It is happening.
I think this is causing like a backlash.
It
You
is.
know,
It is. It definitely is.
the last instance where this could have been comparable, I guess, would have been the 1920s, 30s, right?
And you know what happened after the Great Depression in
Of course,
1929?
we saw what happened in
Germany?
Germany, and a bit before that, before 1929, it was about 1921 with Mussolini.
Mhm.
The horrors of the First World War had led to Stalinism and Leninism. Leninism, then Stalinism, of course. So the 1920s and 1930s wasn't a very peaceful, brightful period, but the one area of hope was actually the United States. If you think about it, the United States elected a progressive president, and it got out of the 1930s quicker than most of the other countries, and it, by the end of World War II, was richer
I mean,
than
yeah.
than it was before
Why
the
was
war.
it richer though? I'd say
There are benefits. There are benefits that it did have, that it wasn't necessarily bombarded by the Nazis during the war.
Absolutely.
But you have to agree with me that, I hope you do, that the progressive initiatives issued by Roosevelt were more stable. He stabilized the American banking system. He introduced social welfare in the form of social security.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not as
Yeah.
high as we
I
would
mean,
have liked.
without that, you probably would have seen a very strong rise of a real fastest movement
And
in
there
America.
was. You know,
There was.
people don't realize this. When Franklin Roosevelt was first elected president, before you took office, you took your oath in March. So it was like a 4 or 5 month period where you were
A
elected.
transition period,
Yeah. And the most decorated Marine in the United States history was a man called
Smedley
Butler.
Yeah, and
As
he,
well, the
he did
business
denounce
plot.
a business plot of apparently there were
Sorry.
some industrial bosses that wanted that weren't really
They wanted Smedley Butler to
to do a coup against even though Smedley Butler was probably the last person they should probably have asked because he
But
was
Smedley
really
Butler went to Congress.
yeah, he
And
was a really
revealed it.
progressive man himself. That's what it was surprising that they chose him.
No, they obviously thought, okay, this is a man who's done. He's the one who wrote the book, by the way, that war is a racket.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the most decorated Marine, when he died, the most decorated Marine to have lived. But, you know, in the election of 1936, he didn't vote for Roosevelt. Do you know who he voted for?
Smedley Butler in 1936. No,
He voted for the Socialist Party of America.
For Norman Thomas.
Yeah.
Wow. Surprising to know. Have you read a book called The Plot Against America by Philip Roth?
No.
It's about Nazi takeover of the United States in 1939.
There was these big rallies throughout. Father Coughlin and
it happens with due to combination of Father Coughlin and due to combination of Roosevelt not sorting the recession fast enough, which is actually what happened. You have this man what's his name? Charles Lindbergh, the
No, of
first man
course,
who
yeah, 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 yeah,
was a fascist sympathizer,
yeah.
running for president in 1914,
No, no, no.
1940, and
40,
he
not 40,
wins.
yeah.
And he wins in that novel. And you can see how the situation deteriorates so fast in the U.S., especially for minorities such as Jews, such as blacks, such as
No,
so. It's something that could have happened perfectly.
and I want
Mm.
to say that it's because, there's that great line, I'm forgetting who said it, but the line that, what is history if not the biography of great men and women?
They say that, but
And
is it
these,
history that, or is it history the movement of peoples?
well, that's another interpretation. I was going to say, like, without Smedley Butler, imagine it was another general of a lower moral standing. Would we have defeated Nazism?
We don't really know. We
But
can't know.
the reason I bring up the 1930s is it does give us a good indication that, and if you look at the American economy, there's a reason why America is the most powerful economy in the world. And during the period of 1930s to 1961, 63 even, the highest marginal tax bracket in America was 91%. And even under so-called, if anyone proposes a 91% taxation now, they'd be laughed out of the street.
Look at how
But that
Alexandria
well,
Ocasio-Cortez has
no,
been
but I was
received.
going to say exactly. She's changed the conversation
She has. She definitely has.
without without AOC. As I like, by the way, how crazy is it that she's a first-term congresswoman? She's already known by her three initials. The only other American political figures that have that
Have been residents.
have been, they've been FDR, JFK, LBJ, MLK, and RFK. I wouldn't want to. I would love to be in this company.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And what a rise!
I think I'm really looking forward to the democratic debates and for the democratic primary because I want to see to what extent have the mainstream democratic candidates taken
But who
that
are these?
rhetoric.
You see, this thing, they've all adopted the rhetoric.
But will they carry it there?
This is what my fear is. They've realized that the base of the Democratic Party is in the left. So you have people like Kamala Harris or Cory Booker, or I don't know. I don't know too much about her record simply because she doesn't have a record. But even Kamala Harris, Christian Gillibrand and Cory Booker have been in Congress for a long time, and they are pro Wall Street Democrats who are pretending to be the Robin Hood. Kamala Harris, when she was Attorney General of California, she refused to prosecute the chairman of One West Bank, Steve Mnuchin, who's Trump's Treasury Secretary.
She was really harsh on poor people of color that committed crimes instead. So she was actually very hard on the weaklings and very soft on the big bosses. I don't think that this really spells
Look,
success
I think
for
you're being
her.
a bit harsh on that regard because she was the Attorney General. It is her duty to enforce the law.
Yeah, but why was she so heavy-handed against people that were just like committing very minor
Look,
crimes?
I don't know. Again, I have to do more diligence on this. But
She also has a terrible track record on the welfare of transgender inmates in California prisons. So that's she has a lot of baggage if you go into her for the primary. If you ask me personally who I think nominee is gonna be, I think it's gonna be either Elizabeth Warren or Kristen Gillibrand.
okay, now I'm sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you there. Kristen Gillibrand has no chance. Kamala Harris, this is where I think you and I are gonna have a disagreement. She's the most talented politician I've seen since Barack Obama. What is Kristen Gillibrand's slogan? She's running for president. What's her slogan? What's Hillary Clinton's slogan? I'm with her. What a nonsense slogan.
A terrible
What's Kamala Harris's slogan?
miscalculation.
For the people.
Yeah.
That's a great slogan. Did you see her opening speech?
I saw her opening speech. I'm still not perfectly convinced that she will be able to get the nomination. I'm not saying she has no chance.
I'm saying she is the top. She, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden.
Bernie Sanders will run.
Of course he's going to run.
I'm on the fence on that. I mean, not that I don't like
No,
him.
no,
I love
of
him.
course he's going to run.
But
No one writes a book in a presidential year, goes to Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina.
He probably. I mean, I'm not saying he will not. I think he may will. He may. But on the other hand, you have to recognize that that Elizabeth Warren running was gonna dent pretty hardly on his vote.
Elizabeth Warren, I love Elizabeth Warren, but she's not a good campaigner. That she completely screwed over that messaging that she did with bringing that DNA test. That she's one
That was a serious misstep. Yeah.
300,000 Native American. No, she's a great policy wonk, and she's a fighter, but she's not a great campaigner. I tell you.
So you think it's gonna be either Bernie Sanders?
It's gonna be Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden.
Joe Biden, there's a problem though.
I don't. You see, Joe Biden. I have a confession to make. I've liked Joe Biden since 2008. I've always liked Joe Biden as a guy, as a campaigner, and his personal story is one of the best personal stories you can get.
But again, he has a lot of baggage after being 50 years in politics.
He has a humongous baggage. You can see when politicians try to hide their record. So he always mentions, I was the first vice president to say gay marriage is good and okay, but he doesn't. He always hides the fact, and no one asks him this, that he voted with 85 other senators for the Defense of Marriage Act.
Yeah.
He's the one who wrote the bankruptcy bill that's made student debt impossible to get rid of, because he was from Delaware. All these corporations are centered in Delaware. He's the one who wrote the violence of. He wrote the crime bill that became the Clinton crime bill. Whilst saying this, he also did some great things.
He also was against busing in the 70s. Huh? He was against busing in the 70s.
He was that's actually a very good point. He ran.
That's gonna come back to him.
He ran
his ass.
He ran for busing, but then when he became a senator, he was he provided cover for the people like George Stennis and the other Southern senators that he famously.
Strom Thurmond.
He didn't provide cover for Strom Thurmond. Strom Thurmond changed sides in the 1950s.
I'm saying that there was
John Stennis.
What was the name? The terrible Southern Alabama senator. Jesse Helms before.
Jesse Helms was
he changed sides in the 80s.
No. Jesse Helms was the senator from South Carolina, and he didn't change sides. You're right. Strom Thurmond changed sides.
Jesse Helms was always a Republican.
Always a Republican.
Really? I thought he was a Democrat before the first time he was elected, and then also changed.
No, that's Strom Thurmond.
Yeah, I know.
Strom Thurmond. This thing about Joe Biden, he can make me like these terrible people. Do you know? I'll tell you why.
Too much baggage.
I'll tell you. So, Joe Biden was never against civil rights. It's just that he voted for busing and voted against busing. That's his record in the Senate.
There's something.
But I'll just say something though. One of my political heroes in life is Robert Kennedy.
Yeah. Really?
And Robert Kennedy is a flawed character.
Absolutely.
One of the most flawed characters. But you know what? I'd rather have Robert Kennedy on my side than most PC progressives. Because what I see in Robert Kennedy is growth. Growth. He started off as working with, I'm forgetting the senator from Wisconsin. Yeah, Senator McCarthy. And by the way, he's the one who wrote the Senate majority, the Democratic, the censure letter for the Democrats against McCarthy. He realized what McCarthy was doing wrong. He was a Cold Warrior. He was a fierce advocate of the Vietnam War during the time of his brother Jack. He was president, but he changed sides, and he became an advocate for peace.
You could say the same about what your argument on growth could also be applied to Hillary Clinton.
No, this is the thing. Hillary Clinton never demonstrated growth. Robert Kennedy, when he talks about, if you listen to that speech, when he says he goes up to the United States Senate floor and gives the reason why he opposed the Vietnam War. That wasn't an easy time to oppose the war. You have to understand, that's 1960 1988, the Democratic president was the one who was launching the war. His own brother started the war. The only senators who were opposed the Gulf and Tonkin resolution passed 19 to 2.
It was Eugene McCarthy, and who was the other opposing it? It was Wade Morse from Oregon. It was Eugene McCarthy from Minnesota, and who is not related at all to the previous.
I don't. Eugene McCarthy is not from Minnesota, by the way.
Eugene McCarthy was from Minnesota.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure he wasn't.
Where was he from then?
Because the senators from Minnesota at that time were Hewitt Humphrey, who then became vice president, and Fitz Mondale.
Yes. Because he was a congressman. He was a Congress representative from Minnesota.
No. I think he was a senator. You see, this is weird political junkies here. He was a senator from Wisconsin, actually.
Who voted against? I for sure Wade Morse from Oregon voted against the Gulf of Tonkin.
No, but this is what I mean. Like when Robert Kennedy, if you listen to that speech, you can see that he genuinely had a change in heart. Hillary Clinton was defending the Iraq War in 2008. She came out for gay marriage in 2014. I'll tell you that if you listen to Robert F. Kennedy's speech when Martin Luther King dies, one of the great speeches of all time. But no, we're getting very distracted.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to say about Joe Biden is he made me like. I'll tell you why I like Joe Biden. So he was giving the story. Have you listened to his last speech in the Senate?
Yeah.
It's a good speech, but there's that instance where a speech where he says that in 1988, he's about to get the House Judiciary Chairmanship, or one of these chairmanships. And the previous chairman was the Democratic senator from Mississippi, John Stennis. He was the last Southern Democrat, He had lost his leg from cancer, and he was a broken man by the time he was leaving office. And he says to Joe Biden, Joe, come in here for a second. They had served in the Senate for quite some time. And he said, Joe, you see this table right there? By the way, have you read any of Robert Caro's books?
No, I have to. The ones on
Lyndon
LBJ,
Johnson.
they're really good.
They're really good. I've only read the one of them, the one Passage of Power, the last one. It's really good. But one of the other earlier books where it's Master of the Senate, there's that famous table, and it's still that table still exists in the Capitol. It's one of the most famous tables, and it's a table that the senator from Georgia, whose name I am forgetting.
Richard Russell?
Dick Russell.
Yeah.
Richard Russell had convened the former Confederacy, and George Stennis says to Joe Biden, it's time that this table passes from someone who was against civil rights to for civil rights. And he was a broken man by that time. But I don't know. One of the things I can't forgive about Hillary Clinton is she said, people who voted for Donald Trump are unredeemable. And I think that's quite a harsh message to say. The famous governor of Alabama, George Wallace, stood against the doors and said, I will not black children's
He became quite of a champion of civil rights.
Exactly.
His life. Yeah.
And he was voted into power by the black vote. And apparently Jesse Helms, when he died, his wife, his widow, told Joe Biden that they were going to vote for Barack Obama that year.
Really? That is surprising, to say the least, even though the Republican brand was quite damaged in 28.
But Jesse Helms.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know if Jesse Helms' wife was trying to lie there, but I don't know. And it doesn't excuse all the things that they did. But I'm saying that Joe Biden has this unique way of, I wouldn't be able to do it, be friends with someone who has those sort of views, but slowly push them to their side. Like, I'll tell you a story about Jesse Helms. We're getting distracted here. People who are listening to this will think, what are we talking about? But I will say the story about Jesse Helms. Joe Biden tells the story a lot of the times. When he first came into the Senate, Bob Dole and another hero of mine, George McGovern, who lost 49 states in the election in '72.
President. He was
but he famously said, "This chamber reeks of blood." regarding the Vietnam War, but they had introduced together this bill on disabilities, and Jesse Helms gives this big rant on why this is a terrible law, and Joe Biden's a young man then, he's only 30 years old, and uh, he talks to the Democratic Senate Majority Leader. Do you remember the Senate Majority Leaders at that time?
In the 80s,
No, 60s.
60s. Oof. Well, Joe Biden was elected in
Huh?
1973.
Who?
Joe Biden was elected in the 70s.
72, but election 72,
Yeah.
Um,
So who was who? I don't know. You got me. Who was the?
it was the Senate Majority Leader right after LBJ, at least the Democratic leader.
Yeah.
I have to check this.
Remember.
I have
can't
to check
remember.
this. But basically, he was saying, so Joe, how are you finding it at the Senate? He said, Majority Leader, I've just had a terrible day. Jesse Helms, I can't find another man with less moral integrity. How could he go against a bill on disabilities? And that Senate Majority Leader for the Democrats told Joe, Joe, what if I told you a story that Jesse Helms and his wife adopted a little boy who was disabled because he gave when he was a kid, he gave a plea in the local newspaper saying all he wanted was a home. And then Joe Biden said, I'd feel like a fool. And it was true. And the lesson was that don't criticize their motives, but
still he voted against. Just to make my point about Biden. To go back
it's got a romantic side
to
of
go
politics.
to go our main conversation, which has been a bit
side. Well, it's okay. It's okay. It's an organic conversation.
There's a problem for Joe Biden, which is we are in the post Me Too year, and
Joe Biden has been a champion of women's rights longer than anyone else.
There are two reasons why this Me Too may become problematic for him. First, because it has demonstrated that the Democrats probably should elect a woman, preferably a woman of color.
What?
Yes.
So you're employing the worst aspects of identity politics.
Let me finish. And second, because there has quite a lot of buzz, at least in American media, for a long time on Joe Biden not being the best in personal matters, not being the best friend of women.
I think you're absolutely wrong there. Tell me.
I've been heard accusations that he was apparently very touchy towards.
No, it's not conversation. It's all on video. But like, motive matters. What's his intent? Because he's from my grandmother, if she sees you, she's 90 years old, she's going to kiss you the first time in the cheeks when she sees you. Because that's what people would do back in those days. They were feely, they were touchy.
Again, that may be the reason, but as soon as a Democratic opponent...
But can I ask you this? Why hasn't, during the Me Too movement, a single allegation like that come up against Joe Biden?
I don't think it's personally. I'm not saying that he for sure has had some kind of scandal that hasn't come to
there is none.
Surface. I'm saying that at the moment, a white elderly man is probably not what the Democratic electorate wants. That is also something.
That's why Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are the two most popular guys in the polls.
Again, I support Bernie Sanders.
But in the polls, they're the two most popular people.
I'd like to see what happens. Hillary Clinton was the most popular candidate in the polls in 2014.
But Hillary Clinton was running against no one. Against Martin O'Malley? What? Who the hell is Martin O'Malley? Lincoln Chafee?
2014, before all those people declared.
No one else was running that year.
Yeah.
This year, all these other women are running, and I want there to be a woman prime minister and woman president as well. But I'm not going to ask anyone to choose a candidate based on their race or gender.
I'm not saying you should do that. I'm saying that there's probably a strong argument to make that the Democratic primary electorate is gonna do that. I personally, again, I would love to have a female president of the United States. I think the time has come. That's why between I really don't care between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. I actually would favor slightly a bit more Elizabeth Warren just for the like the significance that
I like
that
Elizabeth
her
Warren.
election
I
would
like
have.
Elizabeth Warren. I'll give you that.
But again, you
And don't get me wrong. I have a soft. I'm saying this, but I'm a bit of a hypocrite. I have a soft spot for Kamala Harris as well. She would be the
I can't
first.
understand that.
She would be the first Indian American to be
Ah,
president.
that's true. That's true. But no, I was thinking like maybe we. You know what we need? When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez
He's 35.
is 35, she needs to run. We need a Latino American president.
No, you see, there's
We need
there's a great Latino man running for president.
Well, yeah, but he's going nowhere. If you mean Julian Castro,
Yeah, he's a great candidate.
He's going nowhere, man.
Because of the media's ignoring. Anyways, getting off topic, we wanted to talk about despots and the democratic field are not filled with despots. So let's move around the world for a sec, okay? Let's begin with my country.
India, yeah.
It's going to hold an election, small little election this year. India hosts every 5 years. It breaks the record, for the world's largest
largest democracy,
largest election. And if you had asked me who was going to win, and we'll bring why we're talking about this. I think it's topical for this conversation. If you were going to ask me in 2017 December, Abby, who's going to win in 2019, I've said, put it in the bank.
Narendra Modi.
It's going to be Narendra Modi. And Narendra Modi's an interesting bag. I don't know what I feel about him.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's part of this trend we were discussing before of strongmen rising in
but he's a democratically elected leader.
He was.
I can't name another strong man that you would associate similar to Narendra Modi.
In terms of being democratically elected?
Yeah. Look, Turkey's president is democratically elected.
Yeah,
but
I can find you 5 or 6. If you let me.
Just give me a sec. Just give me a sec. If you look at the strong men in the world, the leader of Brazil, Bolsonaro, was only allowed to win because the popular leader at the time
was jailed.
But that's the reason why.
Yeah, but he still won.
But hold on, that's not a fair election. He named the judge who sent Lula to jail, and we will talk about Bolsonaro. He named the judge who sent Lula to jail as his Minister of Justice. This is not a fair election.
It wasn't a fair election. Let's go with our government. Okay, I'll buy that. What about Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines?
Sure, I might give you that.
What about Viktor Orban in Hungary?
Originally, Viktor Orban has controlled the media in Hungary.
Doesn't Narendra Modi has that in India as well?
No, the Indian media is probably one of the most vibrant media places in the world.
Yeah, I'll bow to your knowledge here.
You'll see more criticisms of Narendra Modi in India than you will outside India, because outside India people were charmed by his pro-business policies. No, India has, I'm telling you, the world's most fascinating country, I will say, is India. And I'm not saying this because I'm in India. I swear I'm not. Because India has a couple of things that takes in from all over the world. It's a country that is very united, like the United States. It's not like the European Union. The European Union elections are also in 2019. But if you ask a Frenchman, they will never say, I am a European. They'll say, I'm a French. A German will never say, I'm European. They'll say, I'm German. But an American will say, I'm an American before he says, I'm a citizen of Mississippi. And an Indian will say, I'm an Indian before he'll say he's a Bengali. India is one of the few civilization nations in the world, other being China.
Mm-hmm. I have to raise a point about that. I would agree with you that India is one of the few civilizations countries in the world. China definitely is one. How do you then? I think that would, like, India is very close to it, but it still lacks a couple of countries that would make it truly a civilization country. which are Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. You could
And
say they're Muslim.
no,
You
no,
could,
no, no. I'm
but
not. Firstly, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. But that doesn't mean it's not a civilizational country. Uh, 3/4 of that civilization is within that region.
yeah,
And Sri Lanka was never really part of an Indian nation ever,
wasn't part of the
ever.
Chola Empire.
Yeah, but Chowla Empire never ruled
The
North
whole of
India.
India. Yeah, that's
So,
true. But
and neither
India
was
cities right now has never been in that shape because the Mughals, who were the ones that got the closest to it, never got
you know,
never got the extreme
no.
point
There
of
was
the
another.
Indian
There was
subcontinent, southernmost
no. There
point.
was the Ashoka Empire, which
Yeah,
did it, which had a bigger geographical scope. But we're getting distracted here. Modi's. I don't know what to think of him. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. He's introduced this year, last year actually, India's first serious universal healthcare system, where every family gets 5 lakh. 5 lakh is 500,000 rupees of medical coverage per year. Now, 500,000 rupees, if you convert it, you might not think it's a lot, but in India, 5 lakhs is a lot of money. And healthcare is an issue that I think Indian governments, successive governments, have neglected. Now, you could say it's a political jumla, as we like to say in India, because he's doing it a year before the election. Fair enough, that's a good point, but Manmohan Singh introduced the Right to Food Act a year before the election as well. So politics is
how
politics.
does it healthcare like? To what extent does it depend on the state governments in India? Is there a big
So,
difference
so
between?
Modi's scheme, if I'm correct, it's a 70-30 or 60-40 partnership, where the central government provides 60% of the funds, state governments provide 40%
And
of the funds.
before that, it was like depended a lot on
Before
state.
that, there wasn't this. It's called forgetting what it's called. It's a new policy where there wasn't no centralized policy of this number before. This program that Modi has launched is called Modi Care, by the way, colloquially called. It's targeted for 500 million people. It's the largest healthcare rollout in the world. So I'm going to give him points for that. He introduced this thing called the goods and service tax. Took a lot of blow for it, but it's the first time India's had a unified goods and service tax. It seems ridiculous if you don't come from India that a country didn't have a goods and service tax before. No, it didn't. Uh, his outreach to Indian diaspora overseas has been
But
a pretty good foreign policy move.
isn't that though an increase in nationalism though? Because that's what the Chinese government is doing as well, in terms of their own diaspora.
It's not necessarily nationalism; it's called smart politics. You have a community of non-resident Indians. Why not make them feel part of your country? I've been an NRI since the age of 3. I'm still a citizen, but up until Mr. Modi came to power, we were treated like there was no acknowledgement that we're still part of that same Indian family. Even if you're not a citizen, you still can be that part of that cultural family. And I'll tell you what else he's done. He's been quite smart in not falling victim to the reactionary elements in his party. There's this lunatic who's the chief minister of India's largest state.
Of Uttar Pradesh.
Yeah, he's a lunatic. But
why? Like, can you give me some? Like, I'm not contesting it. I
he
just want to know
wanted.
what.
He has even said that he wanted to demolish the Taj Mahal.
Oh,
Exactly, terrible guy. But Modi has at least been able to hold off that reactionary religious right wing. Saying that, however, and also, by the way, there's been no serious corruption scandals under his tenure. No serious corruption scandals.
still though, after all this,
But hold on,
and
hold on.
acknowledging Modi's roles in the Gujarat riots in 23. that
Oh no, but
killed
then but hold
that
on. I'm not here to defend Mr. Modi, but I will say the Indian government from 2004 to 2014 was ruled by the Congress Party, and they launched 3 investigations on Mr. Modi. They had all the levers of power, right? They control the Central Bureau of Investigation, and the Supreme Court didn't find enough evidence to convict Mr. Modi. You could say he's been incompetent, but this is what I'm going to ask you to look at the Indian history. Hey, do you watch Game of Thrones, by the way?
Absolutely.
I'll tell you my favorite scene in Game of Thrones. In season 2, Varys, the spy master of King's Landing, asks Tyrion, a rich man has asked a sellsword to kill his 2 opponents. A priest has told that same sellsword to kill the rich man and the king. And the king has told the sellsword, don't kill me, but kill the priest and the rich man. Well, who does he listen to?
I think I remember that scene. Was it the one that had that beat the highest payment?
So Tyrion says it's either based on who pays more or it's based on the killer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depends on his inclination. Varys has a very important line, I think, about governments in general. He'll go where he thinks power resides. Power is a trick. It's an illusion that it makes you believe that they're in charge. And over the course of Indian history, there's been instances where the general population has broken the illusion that there's a government that can control them, because no country can really control 1.2 billion people.
Entire subcontinent.
Exactly. And or any country, if you think about it. And mob violence is dangerous. You can't control a mob that easily, especially in India where the numbers are crazy. I don't think anyone will say Mr. Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru was a Muslim hater, but 1.5 million Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims died in 1947. When the Congress was in power in the early 1990s, there were the Barbary Masjid riots. Someone will say Narasimha Rao was an anti-Muslim fighter. Riots happen in India, and it's a shame. It's a disgusting part of our history. But it's not necessarily part of governments. We put too much emphasis into governments. It's the inner demon within all of us. It's the fact that Indians still have a lot of religious hatred.
Going back to the point, I think you have a very fair argument. I'll still think that his.
Hold on, let me switch this off.
I still think that his rhetoric has moderated a bit on Muslim matters.
He's never actually. I'll tell you why I also admire him. He's the first prime minister in India who said in Independence Day speech that never blame the girl if she gets raped. Never ask her what was she wearing, what time did she leave, what was she drinking or eating, and who did she leave with. Ask the boy, why did he do it? I think in a culture in India where unfortunately rape is a large part of the national news coverage, I thought that was quite courageous.
Would you vote for him then?
No. But that's because I come from a state where he has no chance of winning.
If he had chance of winning, then would you vote for him?
No.
Why then?
Because I can't vote for a party that believes in Hindutva.
Mm-hmm.
It believes that India should.
At the end, you're recognizing what's the issue.
India should, in the opinion of the BJP is India should be a Hindu country.
Mm-hmm.
India should be a.
Sorry, forgive my language, but like get rid of the Sikhs, the Muslims.
No. Actually, no. Never the Sikhs. Never the Sikhs. Never the Sikhs.
He has concentrated on Muslims.
Muslims and Christians.
Wow.
But Mr. Modi's never actually said it, but this is why I can't vote for the BJP. I can't vote for the BJP for that reason. Because they have this religious background with the RSS. And Not only that, though, they have this close affinity to big business that scares me.
Hmm.
People like the Ambanis and the Birlas, they have good relations with the BJP, and I don't like that. So, but this is where I'm conflicted. Who else would I vote for in India? The choice is bad, terrible, and disgusting.
What are the? Well, we can't discuss this, but we saw an
But
increase in.
sorry, I just want to interrupt you. But if you ask me now who's going to win the election, I don't know.
Oh, hang parliament.
Rahul Gandhi has surprised all of us, surprised me, how good at campaigning he is. I don't know what he's been doing for the last 15 years, but he's woken up. His sister, who has married one of the biggest crooks in India, and by default, she's a crook, but she's the one who's enabled him to become this rich through corrupt dealings, Mr. Robert Vadra. But anyways, his sister has come into politics this year. She's quite a charismatic speaker. This is the problem with the Congress. It's just a family dynasty.
Yeah, the Gandhis.
And I'd rather have Mr. Modi than Rahul Gandhi simply because he earned it. He came from a tea cellar to become Prime Minister of India.
That is a good point, but again,
And the Gandhis have done more. By the way, it should be noted the Gandhi political dynasty has no relation
to
to Mahatma Gandhi.
yeah.
The
The
reason they're
descent
called
from Jawaharlal Nehru,
Jawaharlal Nehru and
Yeah.
his daughter Indira Gandhi married a man called Feroz Gandhi.
who is not related
Yeah,
whatsoever.
coincidentally, different
Because
religions.
80 million Indians have the surname Gandhi.
Yeah, but the thing is, people outside India might not realize that. So I thought I needed to clear that up. And by the way, my hero is Jawaharlal Nehru. I think he's one of the greatest leaders any country could ever hope for. But there's a saying in the Bible, there's a curse in the Bible that the sins that you do will reflect upon 7 generations of your family. For him, it's worked the other way. The sins of his descendants have cursed his image. So, but I can't vote for the Gandhi family for that reason. They've done more to divide India on religious reasons than any other party. When Salman Rushdie wrote the book Satanic Verses, they banned it, right? So this is quite a acrimonious topic.
And like, what options? What other options do you have? You have the independent parties. Well, not independent, but like
The regional
state
parties.
The regional.
Yeah, the
state
regional
parties.
parties. Well, again, the state I come from, West Bengal, the two largest.
You have the Communist Party of India,
Yeah,
Marxist.
and the
what's-
Tribal Party, which
Yeah.
are both terrible. There's no ideological difference. They're all really both sides, two sides of the same coin. They're both equally incompetent. But the Indian election is very strange, and I think it's going to be a hung assembly as well.
Parliament, I agree as well.
It'll be interesting to see if there's any post-election alliances. But should we talk about Brazil and South America? What's happening? Because we alluded to that earlier.
What we're seeing in South America is just the backlash against the left-wing democratic governments that were elected in the late 90s and early noughties, and that have been lasted. Well, that
But
have been,
Lula, had he been allowed to run, he would have won.
yeah.
So it's not really a backlash.
Well,
against-
it's a backlash. It's happening. It has happened in Argentina. It has happened in
But Argentina never had that progressive wing that Venezuela
No,
and Brazil
that's true.
had.
It's true. It was more the left wing of the Peronists, which are a very, very twisted,
And
enigmatic
Argentina,
movement that
and
can't
Ar-
really be classified along the left-right axis.
and Argentina, for a so-called G20 rich country,
Oh, it's in a
has
mess.
had
It's a
more
mess.
IMF bailouts and
It's a mess.
US bailouts.
Argentina used to be among the top 10 world economies in the early 20th century, and look how far they've fallen. Because again, no one really knows what happened in Argentina. Like what it has become. It had a very similar history to other South American countries in the late 20th century of being like basically the backyard of the American Empire, which propped up
The
dictators.
Monroe Doctrine, really, right?
Yeah. Which, to be fair, I think there's a very strong case for South American peoples to ask for reparations to the USA.
Of course. Who was Salvador
Allende in Chile.
in Chile.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize, by the way, is when Augusto Pinochet was put in place, he wasn't the man that the odious, uh, disgusting. I can't think of another description for this character. Richard Nixon did. Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger. He wasn't the first go-to guy. In fact, initially approached the head of the army at that time, and he refused. He was like a Smedley Butler, but Smedley Butler didn't have to fight against the world's biggest superpower at that time. They killed the head of the armed forces, and then they introduced Augusto Pinochet. So what the Americans have done to South America is disgusting. So I'll tell you why. I'm quite worried about Brazil, and I'm quite worried about South America because Bolsonaro is, I think, more dangerous than Erdogan or even Putin. And I'll tell you why.
The Amazon?
Absolutely. The entire fate of the planet
depends on
the health of the Amazon. And he's threatened to
wipe it out.
To completely give it out to the logging industry and the big agra. So I have more fears about Bolsonaro.
I agree. I think that we may, if he actually
and he's more doctrinaire.
And if he carries out his plans as they were developed before the election of, as you say, of rooting out all the trees in the Amazon, we're absolutely, there's no hope for the human race. We are already. I mean, I don't know if you read the International Panel for Climate Change.
We've got like 12 years.
We've got to 12 years, and we're basically on the edge. It's not like if something, and that doesn't take into account. You know what's the most scary possibility out of that report, though? That they haven't really taken into account a lot of turning point phenomena.
Like for example, methane.
Exactly.
For example, when the
permafrost melting, for example, or acidification of oceans,
that's held together this vast quantities of methane within
the
no.
So
it's gonna snowball. It has a snowballing effect.
A snowballing effect, exactly, and we for that report, those effects weren't taken into account. If just one of them goes off, there's no hope.
So I'll tell you this. I'm not against all strongmen. I wrote this. I don't know if you read it. I wrote this editorial last year on Xi Jinping,
the Chinese leader,
the ruler for life now. But he's done more for climate change, to fight climate change, than any other world leader. I don't see Erdogan being a real opponent for doing it in climate change.
No, he doesn't have oil. Doesn't care at all.
No, but it affects them.
I mean, I know. It affects them. But isn't that the problem at the end, though? That it affects all of us, but very few people do care.
Like people like Trump and Putin and Mohammed bin Salman, that odious character, those three tried to sabotage the recent UN conference on climate change. Those three countries single-handedly. And now they've got another ally in Bolsonaro. I'm worried. I'm very worried. Look, we've talked about Philippines. We've talked about India. We did a big.
But Brazil has a lot of potential to screw you.
But we need to free Lula. We need to get the Workers' Party back in power. One of the first articles I wrote for Felix, and this is during one of the earlier regimes. I'll be honest with you. They didn't let me publish my article on the impeachment of Rousseau. This was in when? 2016? Apparently, that's when they didn't have a strong politics section. So I was quite annoyed. That's one of the first articles that I wrote to Felix.
I cannot, to be fair though, sorry for our listeners for going into this, but on Felix politics, I think Fred Files did a very good job on changing the direction on the framing of
he gave politics a section on its own. Which, by the way, was there before, but the editor before Fred, I couldn't stand him or her. I didn't even know who this person was. Whenever I'd email him my articles, I wrote an article on Hong Kong, on Brazil, and they're like, no one wants to read these things. It
has become a very solid section in later years. It has become. It's providing a lot of very
under your leadership. You've done more than any of us. You've written more articles than all of us.
It's just a teamwork, and we have very good collaborators. that provide us
in
with
the comment section as
in the
well, of
comment
course.
Yeah.
I will say this, so just to wrap things up, so we've talked about Brazil, we've talked about India, China, America, a bit of Philippines sprinkled on top, bit of Russia.
Yeah.
We talked about India, we did a big U-turn into American past. I still can't think of the Senate Majority Leader, by the way.
We'll
It's-
look for
yeah,
I can look for it quickly.
Yeah. But check the Senate Majority Leader after LBJ. It's the same guy.
Yeah.
And we talked about like Putin. Well, we didn't really talk about Putin so much. Putin is an interesting fellow. Okay, I think Putin I understand more. He's just one of the old style Soviet Brezhnev or I don't know who's the other one, Brezhnev or Khrushchev type characters. He wants to see a strong Soviet Union. He wants to bring back the Soviet Union, and I can understand that sort of character. He's not a chaos agent per se. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
That he prefers to keep the world ticking as it is because he's benefiting from it. People like Bolsonaro are game changers. That's what worries me. Now let's.
Is it? I would. I don't. I can't.
Because I had no.
necessarily agree with that point because South America has had a very strong tradition of what we call in Spanish caudillos, which are strongmen.
Sure, but Brazil had changed the turn, turned the corner.
But you have to remember that Brazil has had less than 30 years of democracy.
That's true.
So
they only got their democracy back in 1988.
Yeah. It's a very weak. As most South American democracies are very weak for two reasons: due to American sabotage, and due to to very strong
the term banana republic comes from
the United
Banana Corporation.
Yeah. So and because there was a lot of conflicting interests between the army and from one side the army and the big corporations, and on the other the peoples of the working peoples of South America, and there has been this permanent struggle between, like, some leader was propped up, that leader proved to be either too far to the left by the Americans, or ended up becoming.
You've always had. Sorry, but you've always had like apparatchiks of American hegemony placed into South American countries. I agree. You've always had that, but I don't know. Maybe it was the naivety in me that believed in what Francis Fukuyama declared in 1990s. It's the end of history. I thought the era of placing your apparatchik there was going to end, but I bring that topic specifically because let's end with the topic that's quite topical today and this week, especially on Venezuela. The leader of their National Assembly has declared himself president.
Mm-hmm.
The American president, American vice president, the European Union have recognized him as the leader of Venezuela, at least the interim president, and they're calling for an immediate election. And they're threatening sanctions.
Yes.
Now, Venezuela has seen 1,000,000% inflation. So I'll be honest with you, I'll lay my cards on the deck. I was a huge fan of Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez won every single one of his elections fairly. And you don't have to believe me, you can trust that well-known communist called Jimmy Carter. By the way, those who don't recognize it, it is
a former American president.
No, and I am joking. Jimmy Carter is not a communist. It's
of course.
He's also sarcasm.
That's also recognized by José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, who was a former prime minister of Spain from the Socialist Party, which is a center-left democratic party, not at all like. I agree with that. Chavez was
a great man. He brought the
I don't know to what extent he was a great man. He was pretty corrupt himself as well.
He brought the wealth of the people of, like the oil wealth of Venezuela to the people of Venezuela. But I'll say that he was a poor economic manager. He should have been investing more in other industries, should have been diversifying the economy, should have controlled fiscal deficits for when commodity prices fell.
And he was a bit of a caudillo himself as well. You couldn't say he was the most democratic
But
the most respect, like the biggest
he
respecter of democracy
he
in
won all of
Venezuela.
his elections fair and square.
Yeah,
And by the way, people forget in 2002 there was a coup against him.
yeah, there was
Okay, so
endorsed by the Americans.
of course, of course. So it feels like deja vu. It feels like deja vu, and Maduro is no Hugo Chavez. Maduro has clearly rigged the last general election. His opponents were put in jail or refused to, or
Again,
were
he's
barred
extremely
from
corrupt
running.
as well.
Very corrupt. He's been able to maintain power by putting the oil wealth of Venezuela into the hands of the military.
Mhm.
You'll see generals becoming the defense minister, the minister of agriculture. You can see the
It has become a
corruption.
client state to Russia and China as well,
Absolutely.
which
Like
is also bad these days because they are
it's
as bad as
become
America.
it's become like it's become more than any other oil producing country, the term petrostate
Yeah.
can be used for
For Venezuela.
Venezuela. Because all the economy is based on this one resource because of poor economic management. But what's your opinion on the Venezuelan crisis? Should we as in the world, impose greater sanctions? Should American, Europe, well, Trump, this is the thing. Trump and Americans are putting sanctions. I know why. They want ExxonMobil to come back to Venezuela and get their oil. But you're a European citizen. What do you want Europe to
it's
do?
honestly very hard. It's very hard because there are two conflicting.
So who's the guy who's declared himself president? What's his name again?
Juan Guaido.
Juan Guaido. My bad.
Yeah. There are two conflicting sides.
He's
there.
only 35, by the way. He just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, well, to be fair, also because the most of the position are either in jail or in
Yeah,
exile.
yeah. Look, absolutely. There's that saying, like, come of the hour, come of the man.
There are two reasons. I think, for on one hand, I have always been extremely skeptical of American involvement in any South American country due to, I mean, we can go on a list on how many American interventions have only resulted in continuous violations of human rights in South America. But we could be here for the entire evening.
The only recent success of American intervention, I would say, is Kosovo. But even then, they've had to maintain. Yeah, but I'd support the Kosovo liberation. But sorry, go on. Yeah, you don't want to put American troops. You said on one hand.
Yeah. And again, it's very and again, it's not just the American government. It is a Trump-led American government. That Trump is a very shady character. We all can admit that. Who is also in cahoots with Mohammed bin Salman, with Vladimir Putin. Yeah,
and with all these American oligarchs, and it's
who would be more than interested in raising the price of oil.
Yeah, exactly.
Which will happen in the case of America from Venezuela, intervention in Venezuela.
So
on the other hand, Maduro, as they say, is a crook.
Yeah,
he's very close to a dictator.
Yeah, I would say so.
And that's why I think the European position of putting a lot of pressure on Maduro to resign and to hold elections is the best course of action, and to target specifically sanctions against Maduro and his yes men specifically, his close collaborators. But the Venezuela people are suffering incredibly and shouldn't be targeted with more sanctions.
No, absolutely. But this is what I'm getting angry at. Maduro is bad, but Trump hasn't issued any sanctions against Mohammed bin Salman.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the hypocrisy of the American policy, but we already know that.
Who's a warlord, and what he's doing to the poor people of Yemen. Killed an American journalist. Like, look, this is where it hits me, okay? Don't give me the lecture that you're for democracy when you're doing nothing in Saudi Arabia.
But do we really think that America has not been disingenuous when preaching those human rights and throughout history? When was the time actually? You could say that. I
would say this though. I do love America because I think it's one of the. The idea of America is a very beautiful idea. It's a republic. They defeated an empire. They have a constitutional form of government. They established a lot of the traditions that other republics have adopted, mainly judicial review, the independent of having a strong independent legislature, not like the British system where the legislature and the executive are all mixed together. So I do have a lot of admiration for America and the American image of it of the Statue of Liberty. It doesn't fulfill it that it doesn't fulfill the ideals of the Statue of Liberty or the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. But I think it's a very noble ideal.
It is a noble ideal, and I think, as you say, there are principles in the American Foundation that are more than admirable. And because again, it was like
Birthright citizenship. No, most countries don't have that. America has birthright
the UK
citizenship.
used to, but most European citizens either scrapped it or didn't have it altogether.
Exactly.
But I think on the other hand, though, it has become there is something in the American framework of government or society. I really don't know.
I can't think.
That makes it very charming with makes the American government very charming with corporations, and that is a bad thing.
By the way, it's only become a thing when in 1970s, you know.
No, at the end of the 19th century, in the Gilded Age, at the end of the 19th century, you had the same problem. Before the
but then you had Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, and the progressive era.
Then you had the election of 1912
and
Eugene Debs.
Yeah,
Eugene Debs got 12% of the vote. But I'll tell you this: not many people know about this story. Have you heard of Justice Powell?
Yeah.
Okay, he was American Supreme Court Justice. He had famously written a memo to Richard Nixon before he was appointed to the Supreme Court that what the American right should do is allow greater corporate influence into their politics. The founder of the Heritage Foundation, that disgusting body that has destroyed the lives of so many people in both America and abroad, the founder of it that famously said, "We don't want everyone to vote. We want as few people to vote," because they knew if more people vote, they're going to lose. And think about it like this. Since 1992, the Republicans have won only the popular vote once, and even that was a dodgy election where the war fever was raised because of fear after 9/11.
I mean, I don't think it's controversial to say that there were very strong irregularities in the 20,000 election.
No, 2000 election, of course, Al Gore won. Al Gore won the popular vote by 500,000 votes, and he definitely won the Electoral College in Florida had the vote been allowed to continue. But even in Ohio in 2004, there's been the exit polls did not match the results, and there were strong suspicions that the voting machines might have been rigged. And that's another controversy altogether. But for now, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, well, my pleasure.
It's been an hour. It's an hour.
We've had a very nice conversation on many topics.
Yeah.
I would be glad that this has been very good.
We'll do another episode.
Absolutely, yeah.
I should say that there's that great. I lived in China all my life, and then there's that famous Chinese curse,
May you live in interesting times.
And we are living in an interesting time indeed.
Let's see what happens. We're at the crossroads. We literally these next 10 years will be the time to decide whether we want to continue our civilization under strong changes, but our civilization, or whether we want to throw it down the sink and let climate change kill us all.
Well, those are very ominous words. Thank you, Nacho. Thank you for joining me, and hopefully we can have a more brighter conversation next time on a more positive topic. But thanks for joining me again. And to all those listening, please do check our channel for regular updates. This is Settlescombe. It's the news channel where you'll get long-form discussions like we have had today into topics that the mainstream media is ignoring in a progressive outlook. Thanks for joining us.